Hello, and thank you for stopping by. This is C# Made Simple, and today's lesson is in the category of data access, and it's going to be Dapper. I might call it Introduction to Dapper or Dapper 101 if you remember your college days. We're going to do a demonstration of Dapper with WPF controls. Basically, we have a list of customers, and we're going to tell Dapper, hi, I've got some criteria. I'm looking for a company. Maybe I only know part of its name, its address, its city. I want you to go out there and fetch me all the people in this table that match this criteria. And then when you give it to me, because nobody wants to learn through debugging or stepping mode, we're also going to show how to dump that into something you recognize, like text boxes, list views, and data grids. So that's what we're going to be achieving. What you need to do in order to get started are just some very simple prerequisites. Basically, if you know anything about WPF controls, that comes in handy. If not, we're going some very, very basic, so you can almost learn WPF controls by example. You have to know about classes, just how they're called, and just some of the syntax and naming classes conventions. There is no inheritance or anything sophisticated. You have to know how to create methods that call other methods. And you need to know how to create, or at least watch, what lists are and how lists are used to pass data back and forth. And then we're also going to do a for each loop to cycle through, and that should be fairly standard, but that is all you need to know. There are no other prerequisites or things like that for this course. Okay, let's talk about Dapper before we start to jump into this. Dapper is the data wrapper, and I presume that's effectively where they got the contraction from, that is the word Dapper. And it simplifies your needs. Basically, it was written by the folks over at stackoverflow.com, and they're still using it, so you know that it's very well supported and is going to be around for a long time. How simple is it to use? It's really hard to overstate how simple it is. You could say it's as easy as 1, 2, 3, but you'd have to leave off the 3. There really are only 2 steps to using Dapper. In one line, you'll create a connection object to your source. In this case, it's going to be a SQL server. We'll show you how you can connect to pretty much any data source. Next line, you do a query or an execute to do your CRUD. CRUD, of course, being create, read, update, or delete. In this case, we're just going to be doing the query because it's in very intro, and we don't want to get too lost in the details. The query is going to read in, and it's going to deliver to us a list with each row, where each element of this list is going to be like a row of data. Think of your data as like a spreadsheet with rows and columns, columns being the properties, the rows being the data records. And it's going to behave kind of like an in-memory record set if you're used to or comfortable with in-memory record sets. Or you could use the command objects for things like your create, your update, or delete. And from there, you take this list that you get back from Dapper and you use it like you would any data source. That's it. It is really that simple, which is part of the beauty of it. I'd like to give credit to Tim Corey of IamTimCorey.com and numerous highly acclaimed YouTube videos from whom these steps were derived. Okay, let's take a look. We're going to do a little demo, and this is kind of like a cooking show. Not that I'm familiar with cooking shows, but they basically don't drag you through every step of it. Amazingly, they can put in pie into the oven, and 2 seconds later out comes a completely baked entity, and it saves you from having to watch them do all these things. That's going to be a little bit like that. You're not going to do much watching of me type. You're just going to see it appear on the screen. Okay, here's the ultimate result that we're trying to achieve. Basically, we want to do a customer inquiry. We want to see who's out there and how do we find them. We use this in our accounting system, which is called Flex Account, which is why you'll see the prefix FA to a lot of things, like our customer master file is called FA customer mast. Don't let that fool you. And we basically have some criteria like company name contains, the address contains, and the city contains. And then we'll click search, and it's going to go out and do the query. So for example, I know it was kind of industrial or industries or something. I can type in INDUS and click search. And here come all the people, there's 18 of them, that have indust or industrial or anything like that in their name. turns out that we have just a text box, and this is not a bound text box. This is just something that we do a for each loop just to show how we can cycle through each of the elements, and as we foreshadowed the return list that Dapper gave us, and just do whatever we want to with each element. Here is a list view with a grid view superimposed, so it's nice and formal. And then here is a data grid, pretty much the exact same thing. And if you know WPF, you know what we have here. If not, you'll get a little bit of an introduction to WPF. I made something as an option because I thought was kind of cute that says, well, if I'm a user, I really don't want to have to search every time or click search every time I type it. If Dapper is that fast, and it certainly should be if you've got a nice powerful thing like a SQL backend, every time I type, it should be able to go out and instantly update that list. So if I know that it was in, I don't know, Highland Park or Franklin Park or something, I'd say, well, I don't know which one of these 18 it is. Let me see if anything about park helps me. And I now see that by doing this, I get just the people that have park somewhere in their name. Every time I type, that happens. If I say, maybe it wasn't industrial, maybe it was something else, I say, let me get rid of industrial. I say, well, you got a lot of people, 100 that have park in their name. Or if their address, I say they were on a street. Every time I type, it shows me the people that have ST anywhere in their name. That's pretty much what we're trying to achieve. We'll show you how to do that in a second. One thing I want to show you, which is kind of neat, is a data grid out of the box automatically has the ability for being able to sort ascending or descending any of the columns simply by clicking on its header. We can do that. Notice that the data grid view, which doesn't have that ability intrinsically, but it is tied to the same list object, which Dapper is going to be returning to us. And so whenever I sort this, it's effectively sorting the underlying list. And since the list view is tied to the same list, then it changes as well. And then here we have a text box stack panel that shows that, okay, we can also bind to the individual, well, in this case it's called properties of the customer object, what in database parlance you'd call the individual fields of the table. Okay, so that's what we're out to do. So like a cooking show, we say this is ultimately what we're trying to bake, and now let's go show how we make this happen. There are only 4 sections to this entire project, and only one of them really involves Dapper. I mean, as you might imagine, there's setting up. These WPF forms didn't create themselves, they didn't bind themselves, but unless you want to learn about Dapper by going through debugging mode, which is not very insightful, we have to do a little bit of overhead just so we can show it to you. The 4 sections. 1, we have to set up something in the Visual Studio IDE. Dapper is not built into C#. We get it from the NuGet library, which if you're not familiar with it, you'll see now. It's a wonderful resource, and like most of these things, they're free. So we're going to have to download Dapper and put that into our project. Then, kind of a little bit of a side trip, we're going to need a connection string to get to our data source. No big surprises there. And to avoid basically having to copy and paste literal around, we're going to install something called a configuration manager and a one-line helper that says, hi, go out to the app.config, find this label, in this case it's going to be called flex because it's the flex account accounting system, and get me the connection string associated with that. Kind of like if you're old enough, you remember INI files, it says, hi, go out there and get me this value for avoid having to copy and paste it. So that's just the IDE setup. That'll take a few minutes. Then we have to basically do a little prep work because when Dapper comes back, it's going to say, hi, I'm giving you a table, a list of objects. What are you going to do with it? It's like, oh, I guess I should have prepared something for a place to put it. So we have to create a class whose properties are one-to-one with the fields of the source table. So if we're going to go and ask Dapper to go out and get us a list of fields and values from a table called customer master, it would be nice if we had a class, which will be instantiated as objects, that have properties for company name, company address, company street, etc., to match the data tables of company name, company address, etc. Then with all that set up ahead of time, we can now actually do Dapper. We're going to create a method with 2 lines to create a connection and a query. That'll be it. It's going to be short. It's going to be simple. Then we just hook it up. We define a list to receive the Dapper's query, and we feed that into the text box, the list box, and the data grid that you saw. Okay, you ready? Let's go do that. Okay, we're going to start a new project from the beginning. So we do File, New, Project, and it's going to be a WPF project because that's the framework that we're going to be doing it for. We'll call it WPF New 1. Doesn't really matter what we call it. And remember, the first thing we're going to do here is just introduce the Dapper, and then we're going to create the connection string system configuration. So we go to here, right-click, Manage NuGet Packages. Major source of information for a lot of things. Nothing is installed. We click Browse, and we type in Dapper. There it is. Lo and behold, we have Dapper. It says, would you like to install it? I say, yes, I would. Thank you very much. It says, are you sure? Of course I'm sure. Okay, that was it. Dapper is now installed. And close that. Now I have to do something very similar with the configuration, system configuration, except the difference is that this is not, it comes from a different source. It's included with C#, but it's just not included in the properties intrinsically. So we go to Properties, right-click, and add a reference, and here we type in Configuration. We want the system configuration, which is the top one. Click Enter, OK. And now we have something called System Configuration, which we'll use in a little bit. OK? OK, now we just simply have to add a helper class, which is actually, we've pre-done this, so it's going to look like this, but let's show you how we do it. Go to your Solution Explorer, click Add, New Item, Class, and just call it Helper CS. That's it. Add it, and we're done. I've already created it, so. And then here we have helper.cs. As promised, extremely simple. We just simply use the configuration manager, which we added as a reference a second ago, and it's going to say, hi, I'm going to pass you in a name, and you're going to give me back the connection string. Where that comes from, if you're not familiar with data access, here we have the app.config file, and you're going to add these lines right in here, something between the tags, connection strings. In this particular case, kind of like the old INI files, if you're old enough to remember those, you'll have a name like Flex and it says, okay, and the value that you return is, or the value associated with it, is this thing right here, the connection string. Similarly, we have a name called Flex with password, or Flex PW, that's going to return this string. We'll show you in the bonus section exactly how you get the syntax for these various connection strings, be these SQL or other data sources, and how on a Windows platform you can use the test.udl wizard to invoke Microsoft's wizard to tell you what the particular values are for your server, your database, and things like that. Okay, we've done the first of the 4 sections. We've created the Dapper from the NuGet library. We've installed the configuration manager, and then we use the helper that uses the configuration manager that's going to get the connection string that we're going to need to get to our data. The next step, class preparation to make a home for the data that's be coming from our table. So we're going to create a class, call it customers, whose properties are going to be one-to-one with the fields in the data source. That's up next. Let's do it. Okay, come back to our Solution Explorer, right-click, Add, New Item, Class, going to call it, in this case, Customers. And we're done. Yes, I'm clicking Cancel instead of Add because I've already done it, but you click Add, and you get what would, for you, would be a blank class. What we're going to have to do, and we'll show you how to do this in the bonus material at the end, how you can make this a whole list of properties without doing any typing by basically copying and pasting it from the SQL Server Studio. But pretty much one-to-one, if your data table has a field called customer ID, bill to ID, ship to company, etc., then, and you want it, you have to make a property which is an exact match. Dapper will fetch the fields that are an exact match for the properties table. If the table has fields that you don't have below, it'll simply skip it. For example, if you had a field in your table called, I don't know, customer max credit limit, and you don't have a property for that down here, this is fine. I'll just step over it and find the ones that you are asking for down here. Now, if you do have a property below that does not match exactly what the table.fields is, that property simply won't be fetched because Dapper says, I have no idea where to find it. I'm just leaving it alone. Okay, so we'll show later how you can make this without doing a whole lot of work using SQL Studio to avoid having to type in the names. But basically the idea that says, hi, this has to be a one-to-one match with the fields that you want from your database table. Okay, so far so good. Okay, we're back to the big main event. Step number 3, Dapper per se. We're going to create a method, we'll call it data access, and it's going to have basically one method in it initially that's going to say, get me back my customers. I'll tell you what the where clause is, and that little Dapper magical data access method is going to say, fine, I'll create a connection, then I'll do your query, turn it back to you in the form of a list, and we're done. Let's do it. Okay, we need to create the data access, which, like a cooking show, we've actually already done before we started taping. But the way you do it is you right-click, click on Add, New Item, just a regular old generic class. We'd call it Data Access. And then click Add. In this case, I'll click Cancel because I've already done it. And here we go. Okay, first couple of things you're going to need to do. First, you have to include these 2 lines in the directive. Using Dapper, since we included it, and then something called system.data. Okay, a little bit of overhead. Now, structure, really only 3 lines of interest. 13, 17, and 21. Well, and then the return. But that's basically all we've got here. Going to create a method called list of customers. Call it whatever you want to. Call it, give me a list of customers for the where clause that I'm about to pass you. Kind of a long method name, but whatever. I say that because one thing that really bothers me about training videos is they use very tight, shortly condensed names that kind of look like reserve words, like customer list, which is also maybe the name of their object. Or I've seen one where they create a variable called string and call it string as a new string, and we're going to put string into it. So forgive me if my labels are a little bit verbose, so you know that this is not a reserve word, this is an arbitrary, whatever you want to call it. So we've got a method that says, give me a list of strings without the gimme in front of it. And what type is it? Well, it's going to be a list, an array, and each element is going to be a customer. And the customer, as you recall, is this. So every element in this list is going to be a set of these properties. I'm beating a dead horse if you're familiar with this, but if you're new to C# and or Dapper, this may or may not be so obvious. So that's what the entity is, the list of customers, and we're going to pass it as string, which is the where clause, like where company contains UNI and city contains PARK, etc. And then optionally, just for grins and giggles, we can pass in what fields we want back. It'll default to star, which is to say all of them. But this is the method that you can create that says, what do you want Dapper to do? Okay. Promised you everything in 2 lines. Magical line number 1, right here, the connection object. Remember we had to go off and build a helper class? There it is, helper, CNN value. We pass it in flex, and it's going to give us back that connection string. And that's it. So, and that makes us the connection. Little note here is we're putting this inside of a using clause. This is important. Not the same using up here in the directive, even though it's spelled the exact same way. But this using clause, anything between these parens, is automatically destroyed when it's done being used. That way you don't have to worry about leaving objects or things that take up a lot of space when they're done. So that's why we have the using clause, and that's why we put the connection inside of a using clause. And again, not to be confused with the exact same spelling of using in the directive. Totally unrelated. So far, so good? Okay, magic number 2. Don't blink. It's almost over. We're going to use the connection that we created to create a query. This is where Dapper does its magic. This is what it gets paid for, which of course is free. And we're going to say, I want you to return me a query of customers. Customer is, again, just to beat a dead horse to make sure we got this and there's no ambiguity, one of these things. So connection, query, customers, and then pretty standard SQL type of connection string or selection statement. We use the $, of course, to interpolate, to fill these values in. And we're going to select the top, in this case 100, because I really don't want to get 10,000 or however many people in this case by doing a selection list. And it's going to be from the customer master file, where, and then whatever where clause we pass in. Things like customer contains universal or city contains park, etc. And yes, I know that there are people out there that are cringers saying, Henry, you're just begging for an injection attacks. You need to sanitize your data. And yeah, maybe we'll show you the famous XKCD comic on that one at the end. But this is a demo. If you're smart enough to know what an injection attack and data sanitation is, you're smart enough to know how to fix this. I need a demo here, so I don't want to get lost in the complexities of data integrity. And finally, we say, we decided that we want this back in the form of a list, whereas query is going to return us a sophisticated enumerable object. So we say, by the way, Dapper, when you're done, please convert this into a list, because that's what we promised that we were going to return as our output. Okay, right here, this is it. Everything that is Dapper, everything that says, how do I get data out of a SQL table, out of anything, is pretty much right here. We good? Okay. In the Tim Corey video, which we'll show you where to get to at the end, he goes off and does more details about more proper style, like using stored procedures and things like that, which is great. I just don't want to lose focus that says, hi, I just want to talk about Dapper. Everything else, like storage procedures, sanitizing your data, everything else, like, okay, that's a different building block for a different day. Okay, moving right along. We've now done steps 1, steps 2, step 3. Now, we just have to put it all together. Let's do that, and we're going to be doing that in XAML with WPF binding and some pretty basic stuff, and in some respects, it's all over. We've done it all. It's just a matter of binding the list back to something that we can see visually, because nobody really wants to see that it worked by doing debugging mode and right-clicking to see internal properties. That's no fun. So let's do it the fun way. Okay, here's our XAML code. And as you can see, we're doing it directly instead of through drag and drop. We've made our grids. And I want to do a side tour just real briefly for the new people, which I was not all that long ago, and said, my God, it's got this wonderful drag and drop. Why are you doing it the hard way with the grids and graph paper and all those other things? And the answer is, well, I did it in drag and drop initially. Here it is. The problem is that it creates code which you really can't do much with, and there's a whole list of reasons that says, okay, once you're done with the code that you have to do something with, you really can't go much farther than that. So what I did, like an artist who maybe is painting a bowl of fruit, but you need something to look at for design purposes, I did initially start it in drag and drop, laid things out, decided how I want them to be, and then I pretty much discarded it and came over and said, okay, now I need to implement that with grids, grid panels, stack panels, and all those other things that we can talk about another date. Recognize this from the video. We have the customer address and city name for input. They're just text boxes that we interrogate that say, hi, we need to build a where clause. Then we have a text box, which is going to be populated manually with a for each loop just to poke each set, pardon me, we're going to poke data values from every current row into here just to show how we can enumerate through the current list. And then we have the list view, and then we have the data grid. Those two objects are expecting a two-dimensional array, kind of like a spreadsheet, and so we could hand it the list directly. And also, for completeness sake, that if we want to see individual elements, like I want to elaborate on the customer address, the customer contact, all the various other things that aren't in a list, we have this little stack panel that's going to show you that says, well, these guys are expecting to bind to a list directly, and so you can just feed them the list that comes out of Dapper. Individual text boxes, they need a specific one-dimensional object with just being told what property that they need to bind to. And so, for example, here, if you're familiar with WPF, if not, here's your intro. It says your text is going to be curly bracket interpolation. I want you to bind to the company of what your data context is. That's it. And then here, for those of you who are familiar with your data grid, who are familiar with data grids, we say, okay, there is something called auto select. It says, fine, I'll put a column for every single field that you give me back, and then it'll be about 6 miles wide. Here we say, no, I'm going to enumerate what the columns are. I want to call one of them company, and it's going to bind to this thing called C company, and then I can specify my width, etc. Something I call city is going to be the field called C, and we use Hungarian notation, so C for character string city, etc. We have 2 or 3 address lines. We're going to call it address 1 in the database, but for the table, we'll just call it address, things like that. So that is the XAML code behind. Hopefully, if you're new to WPF or if you're experienced, you say, okay, I kind of get it. And now we just have to hook it up. Ready? That's all done in the code behind. Here's the code behind. One of the first things we have to do is we have to anticipate the fact that in a minute, the Dapper is going to return to us a list, and we have to have a place for that list. And so we say, okay, we're going to define a list, and we'll call it customer list. There's a clever name. And it's going to be a list, and specifically each element is going to be a class called customer. And again, that thing right there is that right there, and we're going to make a list of them. Conceptually, list is like a two-dimensional array, like a spreadsheet with rows and columns. The rows are records in your database, your columns are your fields or your properties. Text boxes, that little thing of blue in the lower left-hand corner, says I can't get my hands around a two-dimensional entity. I need a one-dimensional entity, and then you have to tell me which element, like the first one, which might be company name, the second one, which might be company address, to bind to. And so in anticipation of that, we also have to create an object that is just one entry in that list, and here we'll call it current customer. So far, so good? Okay. Remember the buttons? Well, every time you click the button that says search, it says, well, I want to update all the filter results. I could call it something long like get a new query and populate the text boxes. I call it update filter results. What does it do? Pretty simple. Update filter results. First of all, we have to generate a where clause. And again, yes, this is begging for an injection attack. I need a simple example. Work with me. It says, hi, remember that field that asked for if you wanted part of a company name? Well, here it is. I want you to concatenate a where clause that says, and company, C company, because that's the name of the table for the field in the table, is going to be like, and then in SQL parlance, the apostrophe, pardon me, the percent signs are your wildcard characters, and company like INDUS with wildcards on either side. Ditto for the address, ditto for the city, and you basically have created a dynamic on-the-fly mix and match where clause. Unfortunately, we have to get rid of the leading and, so we say, okay, if we put in anything at all in the where clause, get rid of the first 4 characters, start in the 4th character, and move on. So it doesn't say where and company like. It's like, no, that won't work, so we get rid of the leading and. Okay, nobody's allowed to go to the bathroom. This is it right here between lines 47 and 52, of which 4 of the 5 lines are just comments. We call Dapper. Data access, that's our function. That's that guy right there. We're going to call list of customers. And I say, hey, I need to make a new instance of it. And I want to pass it to you, this where clause. And I want to call the method called list of customers. And it's going to return to me a list. And I'm putting it in customer list, the thing that I created up here. Okay, so that's how all the pieces hook together. Done. Dapper has now done its job. It's through. Now we feed the text boxes. Text boxes, as you recall, the first one, the top left of the 3 items there, is just a manual text box that we're poking in directly. Customer list is a enumerable list. So we say, okay, for each element in that list, I just want to make a string which is going to be the company name, right, padded in a field of 12 for cosmetics, a vertical pipe character for cosmetics, and then the address and a line break. And we're just going to cycle that for every element in the customer list and poke what was the data control for the text editor. Just manually cycling and poking something into there. Pretty crude, but it's nice for debugging purposes. Now, we just simply have to refresh the controls. We say that the list view has the current customer list, which wasn't the same customer list as it was a second ago. Ditto for the data grid. And because I'd like to see how many rows are there so I don't have to scroll through and count, I made a little text box on the side that says, hey, that customer list. Figure out what the count is, turn it into a string, and put it in the text box on the left. That was nice. Okay, and something just a little bit different because we have a current customer object. Lists and data grids are expecting a 2-dimensional spreadsheet type of data. So that's perfect for the customer list, which is 2-dimensional. Like a spreadsheet. But text boxes can only grasp or get their hands around one entity, like one row in a spreadsheet, and pick a particular property they're in, like one column. So we have to have the customer list broken down into something bite-sized that a text box can get its arms around. So we created the current customer objects for just one customer, and then we just have to populate it. Okay, for demo purposes, we just said arbitrarily it's going to just bind to whatever the last element in the list is. You would normally bind it to whatever the selected row in the list view or the data grid is. I don't want to get off into the weeds and do something like that in an intro. So here it is. We say, okay, I'm going to just pick whatever the last entry in customer list is. And since it's 0 based, it's count -1. And current customer is going to be, for example, if there were 5 elements in the list, the current customer would be customer list square bracket 4 close square bracket, saying I want the 4th element, or element number 4, which is the last one in a 0-based system, and that's going to be the object that I bind to. Then we say fine. Again, we have to tell it that the object is new, it's been updated, so the company address and zip, which is in the little blue box below, have been updated in the binding, and we are done. Like totally done. Okay, that's it. We are totally done. Let's go run it one more time just so you can see it after the fact in perspective. And then we're going to do a couple of bonus items. Bonus things being, we're going to show you where you can find all the various formats of connection strings, because those details can be what hang you up. And then we're going to show you how you can create a test.udl on your Windows desktop that'll tell you what the exact parameters and spelling of your server, etc. are. And then we're going to do a little something with data table classes, because we promised you that you could make that big long list without any typing, and how you can do a little bit of aliasing so that in your app you can call the fields what you want to, even though Dapper says, I'm sorry, I really need to have them named exactly with what they are in the table, and so you can have the best of both worlds. So let's go off and just show it to you one more time because it's fun. Then we're going to do this, and then we're done. Okay. Now that you've seen behind the covers, you've seen the man behind the curtain, to use a Wizard of Oz reference. This is it. Every time I type, because I clicked on the instant button, it's going to automatically call that update command and get a new query. So if I'm looking for United or Universal or something, I type in the U, and the underlying database is a couple hundred, maybe 1,000 people long, and it's still going out there and finding them. And then it's binding to whoever the last element is, just because I'm being quick and simple about this. Okay, that's it. Certain little things for the fun of it with WPF controls. We alternate grids for coloring and things like that. No big deal, but that's it. We are done. Now we're going to do some bonus material, and I'll be completely wrapping up. Thank you much. Hold on. Okay, bonus material, www.connectstrings.com, and basically how to do connect strings. Let's go to that website and see what it has to offer. Okay, here's www.connectstrings.com, and for all the people that says, my God, everybody's got a different syntax. How do I go back to an AS400? I don't even know what that is. Like, well, here we go. So if you go to SQL Server, it says, here's the style, and you'll recognize this from our app.config. You just need to have it of this context where you need your server address, your database, username, and password. If you're using a trusted connection, it would be like this. And ditto for all the other various places that you might want to get a connection string for. Again, that's connectstrings.com, and then just pick your connection. Okay, next thing. We're going to talk about how you get the connection string for your particular case. The way we get Microsoft to help us is create a document called test.udl, Universal Data Link, and that will invoke the Microsoft wizard, which will walk us through it. So I create a new, and then I have to start out as a text document, and I'll call it test.udl. Comes up and says, are you sure? I say, yes, I am. And look, it changes the icon. Brings up this little fellow right here. It's going to walk us through and build the string for us. We'll end up renaming it back to test.txt, then we can look at it. This is the name of our server, in case we forgot exactly how we spelled it. And we can use either Windows NT Integrated Security or a specific password. So for example, if you had a username and password associated with this, you could pipe in your username, your password, and then if you said allow saving password, it would then save it back to the text file. In this case, though, we're going to use trusted security, which basically says, if I'm good enough for Windows, I'm good enough for you. And so I click and say, which database on the server do you want? Here's all the databases that are on the server. I'll take one called FlexSQL, verify it. Obviously, it's already talking to me or it wouldn't have had the drop down. And I say, okay. And I say, oh, this is good. Now I got to do is just rename it back to test.txt. It says, are you sure? I say yes. Then when I open it up, here's the information that you saw in the app.config. Now, as we saw in the app.config from the connection.com website, that's not exactly the format that C# and VS wants it, but all the important names are here. We don't use the provider, but here's the spelling of this, which is called initial catalog, etc. So we get all the spelling properly. So that's how we use the test.udl to help us find what the particular naming is. Connectionstrings.com, and your test.udl will be able to tell you what the particulars are of your parameter. Okie dokie. Now, as promised, we're going to do some bonus materials, which is how to make your own field properties without doing much typing. Okay, let's say we wanted to add another class called vendors. Well, that's not bad, except I really don't want to do any typing, and I'm lazy. So I'm going to create the class, add, new item, class, and I'll call it, how about vendor? And since I haven't really created it yet, I'll click add. And there we go. Ooh, a lot of typing ahead of me. Well, I'm lazy, and so we're going to have it type it in for me. Let's see how we do. Okay, I've opened up SQL Server Management Studio, and I say, hey, I want to go to my databases for FlexSQL. I want to find the table called vendor, and I need some way to trick it into giving me all the fields as quick and easily as possible. And so I go to Vendor Master, and I select the top 100 rows. And there it is. I don't really care about this. All I really want are these fields, and so I can copy down as many as I want. In this case, I'll just take a few of them. Got what I came for? Paste. And I am almost done. Except obviously, this isn't how it's supposed to work. I need to replace each one of these square brackets with that get set. And so I'm going to use search and replace, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Okay, so I do that. Control H. Then I want to replace it with get set in the current document. Enter, enter. Yeah, do it for all of them. Thank you very much. Okay, that was easy. And then similarly, I want to replace this open square bracket. Got it. So I replace comma square bracket with private string. Place all. And I'm almost done. Now, this database uses Hungarian notation, so I can tell just by the name that anything that begins with an I is really an integer. And so in this particular case, I do have to go through Control C, Control V, and now I'm done. Okay, I've now made my customer class without any typing. Next and final step is how to make aliasing so that if, for example, they call it company, they say, oh, well, in our application, we're going to want to call it vendor name. Like, well, great. If this is how it's called in your table, Dapper is going to need a field called C company. How can we have it both ways? We'll show you how to do that in 1 second. Ready? Okay, let's do that. Okay, and so like a cooking show, we're not going to show you my typing, but we have our property called company with a get and set with some implicit underlying backing field. We'd like to also expose a property column name called vendor name. We'd like it to be the exact same. So I say, fine. Whenever someone wants to get vendor name, we return them company. Whenever they want to set a value for vendor name, we set it to company. And so now both vendor name and company are pointing to the same underlying implicit variable. That's it. That's all you need to do aliasing. We're back to our PowerPoint slide. We've done the connection strings, the test UDL. We've made your copy and paste field properties without typing, just doing rename, copy, and paste. And how we've even allowed you to rename your fields by using a little bit of aliasing. I want to give credit and thanks to Tim Corey, whose full version of this video, including command executes, is in his full video. It's an hour and 20 minutes long, so this is a slightly shorter version of that. And on the YouTube channel, it seems to come up with 2 home graphic screens, the white one and the blue one. They both take you to the same places. I strongly recommend that you take a look at it. It's a wonderful video. Our gratitude to Tim Corey. Just for fun, which is my tribute to the people who appreciate data sanitation and injection attacks. And for those of you who remember XKCD comics, here's the basically classic one about data sanitation. It says, hi, this is your son's school. We're having some computer trouble. Oh dear, did my son break something? Well, in a way. Did you really name your son paren, apostrophe, close paren, semicolon, drop table students? Oh yes, little Johnny drop tables as we call them. Well, we've just lost our entire year of student records. I hope you're happy. And the lesson is, and I hope you've learned a lesson about sanitizing your database inputs. Okay, so the where clause is definitely an invitation for an injection attack. And in case you wondered what's an injection attack, here's your XKCD comics. Thank you for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed this. Look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks. Goodbye.